conference.
Hi, welcome. This is my second attempt after my first attempt didn't work out quite so well. This is a Week 8 live lesson, and it's an introduction to editing, really. Excuse me. So what I want to look at this week is mostly how editing works as punctuation, how it's unique to film, and what that actually means for the way that we read and make films. So let's get right on. So you've probably already guessed that film borrows from many other art forms, but the one unique thing that film has. Okay, hopefully I'm back now. Seem to be facing all sorts of technical issues this morning. So it borrows from many other art forms. For example, you might say that lighting comes from theatre and from painting or from photography, that the actual, the stuff of film has its origins in photography. Lenses comes from optics. But editing is unique to film. That placing two shots together, shot A and shot B, we'll say for now, has an impact on audiences. And it's key to our understanding of how filmmakers put their sequences together to make meaning. This doesn't happen by accident. There is intention behind it. So it's one of the ways that we can explore a filmmaker's intentions. And that will become crucial as you get further into the course, where much more rigorous analysis is required of you. So not only is it central to our readings of films, it's important for you to consider this when you're putting your own films together. So let's move on to our next slide. At its most basic form, editing is punctuation. And it's part of the grammatical structure of film. There is a grammar to the shot, but the way shots fit together is part of the grammar of film as well. So at its most basic, you could say a straight cut is like a comma. It's like a breath in a sentence. And that, say, a cross dissolve could be like a period or a full stop. And a fade to black and fade up from black is like the end of a paragraph. So if we see it as punctuation, that is at its very basic level how it works for a straightforward narrative sequence. Although editing can be much, much more sophisticated than that, and we'll try to look at some of that today. But, excuse me, the way that one edits a sequence or a short film governs the narrative emphasis. So that if you want to draw audience attention to things, one can do that in the way that one fits shots together. If you recall my storyboarding presentation, I talked about the continuity system there and how we subverted the continuity system in one shot to draw the audience's attention. So this is how editing can create narrative emphasis in a sequence. Editing also determines the pace of what is displayed, that the take duration, and we talk about take duration, not a long shot. A long shot is something else, as you know, it's a shot selection. We talk about long take. So a series of long takes placed next to one another has a kind of calming effect, whereas a series of short takes placed next together gives a dynamism to a sequence. I recently watched the video of the Killers concert at the Royal Albert Hall, their DVD, and it was extraordinarily disjointed, that there wasn't a single shot throughout the whole DVD which lasted more than about 3 seconds. So it gave a sense of the dynamism of their performance. The way that shots are fitted together also impacts on the audience's understandings of what they see. So that placing shots together which are not matched graphically, which have different lighting or different textures or different palettes, can be jarring to an audience. Or to place an image which is sparse next to one which is dense will have an impact on the way that the audiences read the second image. And finally, editing can also apparently reconcile apparently conflicting ideas, and we'll come to this next. And I want to show you a little example, which I think
you are currently the only person in this conference.
So, this is, unfortunately, I'm unable to show you a video of this, but you can find this on YouTube, which is where I did and where I made these screen grabs. This is a short sequence from F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu from 1922. It's a German expressionism film, and you'll get to look at that in a little more detail within the next few weeks. And this is the Nosferatu is the first vampire film, essentially, and it's an unauthorized adaptation of Bram Stoker's novel. And this is the sequence of the first attack by the vampire on Jonathan Harker. The guy's name is called Rutter in the film. And there's a point where the tension builds through the editing, which is not the point which I'm interested in. This particular sequence demonstrates some of the eloquence of editing through parallel editing. And you'll notice that I've included 5 images. We begin with Murnau's use of light and shadow to magnify the terror of the Nosferatu character. It also has a symbolic element in that Nosferatu represents a kind of darkness. So he's casting a shadow over Harker. Let me just see if I can increase the scale of this. So here we go. Hopefully you're seeing this as well. So this is the first of my stills. In the bottom right, we have the victim, Rutter, and we see the shadow of Nosferatu over him, about to actually consume him. But suddenly, his shadow withdraws. Now, this sequence is intercut with a sequence which is taking place apparently hundreds of miles away in Rutter's house in Bremen, in Germany, as opposed to Transylvania. So suddenly the vampire withdraws, and then we get to see why. This is Mina, Rutter's wife, who's calling out to him in a dream. She's sleepwalking, or hardly walking, but she's asleep, but she calls out to him, and she expresses her love for him. And what this does is that it either distracts the vampire, or the power of love is much more powerful than his supernatural powers. So he withdraws and then he turns. Now, the interesting thing here is that Mina is screen right. The vampire is center of the frame, but he turns to screen right, where Mina, hundreds of miles away, is expressing her love and her dread for her husband. So this is what we would call a match cut. And then the vampire withdraws. So this is a match cut, and it illustrates the power of the match cut, and it reconciles a couple of ideas here. These being the fear and the terror of the darkness of Nosferatu is overpowered by the power of love, just pretty much in these 3 frames. Now, in the film itself, there are several intertitles in this sequence, but it's difficult to say whether the intertitles actually represent Murnau's intentions or whether they represent the intentions of the exhibitor. But it seems clear to me that this piece of intercutting here, this parallel editing, events which are happening at the same time, but hundreds of miles away, have an impact on each other and the way that we can read this sequence. So this is a really, really eloquent use of intercutting, which was, as I said, was an idea which was invented by Edwin S. Porter in about 1910 or 11, and developed by Griffiths in his notorious film Birth of a Nation, but used most eloquently here. Moving on. So let's just get this back to size. So your edits should be planned in pre-production. It seems clear to me that that edit was planned in pre-production because what Murnau was doing, he was shooting sequences at different times, but representing the same time in different places. And he had planned to put those two sequences together to actually communicate this idea and this theme of love being more powerful than the darkness of the vampire. And we see that in the outcome of the film, that Mina gives up her life in order to kill the vampire. Oh, oops, I've just introduced a spoiler, but you'll enjoy it anyway. So there are two main approaches, although many different techniques. There's the continuity system, which governs most of American films from about 1915 through to the modern day. And there's montage editing, which has its origins in Soviet Russia in the early 1920s or the late teens. That Lenin thought of cinema as the most important art form of the 20th century because it was a way of getting messages across to a mass, largely illiterate population. And it was used as an ideological tool by the Bolsheviks. So they established a film academy in Moscow in the late teens and early 20s of the 20th century, where experiments were conducted on the idea of montage. Now, montage is used in contemporary American film and probably most frequently used in things like pop videos. But we're going to take a look at montage today because continuity editing in itself, there are several rules to this. It's being covered by the lesson in the Week 8 content. So montage is actually the French term for editing. But montage in this context is how shots are placed next to one another within a film in order to cause clashes or to manipulate audiences. They're not necessarily used as a narrative tool in the traditional sense, although they raise narrative ideas. So the continuity system is for hiding the means of production and ensuring a smooth, continuous flow of story information. The montage system doesn't reject this, but actually adopts a different approach to communicating story or filmic ideas. So, montage begins with the Kuleshov effect, and unfortunately, I can't show you video sequences of this, but there's one at this address here. Hopefully you'll be able to copy and paste from this presentation. If not, copy it out or do a search for Kuleshov effect and you'll find this. But there's also Alfred Hitchcock explains Kuleshov effect as it relates to some of his ideas. So anyway, I've got a quick explanation. Here we go. So what Kuleshov's experiment was to take several short sequences of the film, one with a man with a fairly plain expression, and to juxtapose those with different images. And these are the three different images. The way he did it was to show the food and then the man, and to have a pause, the dead child and then the man, and then an attractive woman and then the man. And he asked various spectators how they responded to each of these juxtapositions and arrived at different results. The food and the man suggested that the man was hungry. The dead child and the man suggested sorrow and grief and bereavement. And the woman and the man suggested arousal and excitement. Check out the Hitchcock explanation of this, which is a little bit more contemporary. Okay? So Kuleshov was the initiator of this, but Eisenstein was the person who developed montage into its most eloquent and highest forms. And Eisenstein identified 5 different forms of montage, which he described as metric, rhythmic, tonal, overtonal, and intellectual. So I'll give you a brief explanation of these, although if you see at the bottom of this slide here, there's a very, very good explanation where on YouTube, and there's also a short sequence of examples to show you. So that's at the bottom of the slide here. But just to begin with, metric montage is essentially film cut to specific lengths which follow a pattern. So, excuse me, it might be that these are specific numbers of frames of the same length, which would give a kind of monotonous pattern. But it might also be that the montage is cut to a mathematically reducing number of frames. So it might be, you begin with 20 frames, then with 15 frames, then with 10 frames, and we'll see more of that later. So that's a kind of, it's a kind of systematic way of cutting. And this is used by, well, Hitchcock uses it, which I'll show you a little bit later. And Vertov used it in Man with a Movie Camera. Eisenstein himself used it in his film October from 1926, or 1927, I beg your pardon. The second type is rhythmic, which, unlike metric, it plays with, it uses a kind of musical metaphor. So there is a main rhythm to the editing, that the cutting is according to a certain rhythm or metric form, but within that there are counterpoints. So the example which is used in the Odessa steps is that the rhythm of the editing is out of sync with the marching of the soldiers down the steps. So if you watch the Odessa steps sequence from Battleship Potemkin, pay particular attention to the way that the soldiers march. The soldiers are out of step with the editing. And of course, there's a metaphor in that they're out of step with the desires of the people in that location. So it constructs a conflict between the rhythm of the editing and the action you see on screen. It's a counterpoint to the overall rhythm or the meter of the sequence. So it uses these kind of poetic and musical terms. And what this does is to create a tension. Again, Hitchcock uses this reasonably frequently, and you see this quite a lot today. The next one is tonal. And this combines editing with what you see on screen. And that one creates a tone with the editing. So that can be a kind of shrillness, which we see in the Bird's gas station sequence, which I'm going to go into a little bit further. But it might be a kind of a monotony, or it might be a dynamism, which combines fast-moving shots with a certain rhythm of the editing. So tonal might also include the elements of lighting and shadow, the chiaroscuro effects of one shot to the next. It might involve a series of match cuts, or it might involve a series of mismatched cuts to create a different kind of tone. So you'll need to look at the shot composition from shot to shot, so how the shots match together. Look at palette, look at camera movement, look at lighting, and see, are they matched or are these elements mismatched? And what's the overall intention of this? So what feelings does it actually create? Create a tension, a shrillness, a kind of relaxation? So the next thing is overtonal, which is very similar and slightly complex to explain. But what this explores are how objects move in time within frames, and then how the tone of that is shifted by the next frame, and how objects and textures are revealed in the next shot. So it's a more complex version of tonal, but it's about greater subtleties in the shot-to-shot relationship. So it's looking at textures across the screen. It's looking at how textures change within the shot and then to the next shot. So this involves camera movement, or it can involve camera movement, which wasn't actually available to Eisenstein at the time. Cameras were very still when he was making films. Finally, there's intellectual montage, and this is the closest to Kuleshov's research, so that one might combine symbolic images, like the man and the food, to create a synthesis, a third meaning. Combining the man and the food creates the idea of hunger. Combining the man and the child creates the third idea of grief. You see how that works? So you have thesis, antithesis, which combine to create a synthesis, a third, more sophisticated idea. So use the links I've placed at the bottom of the page, which hopefully you can copy and paste in order to go to YouTube and have a look at these explanations. So these are my sources. I'm hoping that these links will work. So for Kuleshov effect, it's there. And explanations of the 5 forms of montage with some examples there for you. Just leave this on screen for a little while longer. Okay, so Alfred Hitchcock used montage in many of his later films. He was a filmmaker who was equally at home working in the continuity system, as with montage, as with expressionist techniques. He worked in Germany in the mid-1920s, worked in the UK during the 20s as well, and worked in Hollywood from about 1938 or 39, and became an American citizen and is best known for his Hollywood films. So working within the studio system, he would have to have understood how continuity worked, how the continuity system for filming and editing worked, but used montage as a technique to emphasize key moments within his stories. One only has to think of the shower sequence in Psycho and the final sequences. The sequence I'm going to show you now is, well, I'm going to use stills because I can't upload video to this, is the gas station scene from The Birds, which uses metric. So it uses measured lengths of film, measured takes. It uses tonal, so it combines different shot compositions, lighting and palette, and it uses overtonal montage to build tension. So you might also say it uses a kind of rhythmic montage, but that's less arguable. It might also use intellectual montage because it plays with the symbolism of petrol. So here we go. So this is from The Birds. It's from about an hour into the film, and this is the second main bird attack. And let me just increase the size of this so we can move from frame to frame, and we'll start here. So this sequence begins where the birds have attacked somebody at a petrol station. I'll just give you context. And somebody pumping petrol has been attacked and has let the petrol go, and it's kind of flowed down the street to this guy who's just got out of his car, and what you see on the ground here is the petrol. This man is unaware and he's about to light a cigar. So the audience anticipates that something catastrophic is about to happen. And here's the catastrophe. But that isn't enough in itself. The petrol has flowed in a path from the gas station where one of the protagonists currently is. So this is the female lead. This is Melanie. And we see that she looks screen left, which is tonally, it's a mismatch. Look at the palette in this. It's mostly reds and oranges and greys, and we see a green here which matches to some of the palette in this shot. However, this is pretty much centrally framed. Melanie looks screen left, and we don't quite understand why she looks screen left. So tonally, the relationship of these two shots raises tension because we don't understand what's going on. So she looks screen left. When we go to cut to the next shot, we see screen right that the burning petroleum is bottom screen right. So what Hitchcock has done is to mirror her eye line. So we would expect for the burning petroleum to be bottom screen left, which is the direction she's looking in. But he's placed it bottom screen right. So again, that raises a kind of a tonal montage problem. It creates tension because there is a mismatch of our expectations from the continuity system, because the eye line doesn't match what she's looking at. So it cuts back to Melanie, and this time she's framed centrally, and she looks 1/4 to screen left with an anxious expression. What I might also say is that, again, we have reds, oranges and greys in this, but no greens. So there is a palette mismatch from shot to shot. Again, this creates a further tension. It cuts back again. Now, the burning petrol fills more than half of the screen. Again, from bottom left to top right. So there's a mismatch with Melanie's eye line and the eye line match shot here. An eye line match is an aspect of the continuity system. You can imagine what that is. That in shot A, we see what the person is looking, we see the person looking, and in shot B, we see what they're looking at. And the eye line should match, but in this case, it doesn't. So that creates a tension as well. We got back to Melanie, and now her head is shifted, and she's looking mid-screen right. And this time, we can see what she's looking at, and there's a greater match between where we see her looking and this eye line match. Screen right, the petrol is moving towards the gas station, and suddenly all is revealed. Now she looks upwards, screen right, and in terms of time, this is where the overtonal effect happens, is that there is movement from bottom screen right to top screen left of the burning petrol, and her head moves in the opposite direction. So this is an overtonal montage. The previous shot is she looks even more distressed because she anticipates what comes in the next shot. The petrol station explodes. If you'll notice that the flame here is center of the screen, which is a match for position of Melanie's head in the screen. So there's more of a match here. So we're having this tonal and overtonal montage effect, where there is a texture of the burning petrol, which compositionally, or the framing, matches where Melanie's head is. And her hands are held in a way which kind of is like the bursting of the flames, and we see her red nail varnish. And then the final shot of the sequence, which comes as a real surprise, the sound is now quietened, and we see it from the bird's eye view. Here we have a seagull here, and it's as if they are watching their work. Now, those are the kind of tonal and overtonal aspects of this sequence, but there's also a metric aspect of it. Because the way that Hitchcock cut this sequence was that each of the frames was held for a shorter take. So we begin with a take of maybe about 4 or 5 seconds here, and each of these stills of Melanie and the burning flames is no more than maybe 30 frames. And they decrease in length or in duration of take. So that what the impact of that is, and what Hitchcock understood, and this is the genius of this sequence and his genius in using montage anyway, was that there's too much information in the frame for the audience to take in, so that this builds tension. So in addition to our tonal and overtonal shot relationships, we have a metric relationship which builds tension in the audience. So that I'll try to explain again, because I'm not sure I explained it very clearly, that beginning with this shot here, where my cursor is, of Melanie looking down screen left, and ending with this shot here of the explosion at the gas station, the duration of the takes are shortened in a kind of systematic way, so that the same information, pretty much the same information is given in the frame, but the audience has less time to take the information in, and this creates tension. Okay, I'm hoping that that helps you in creating your own me montage and thinking about how editing creates meaning. And well, there's nobody here to ask questions. I would answer them, but you have a me montage discussion forum where I would like to see some discussion of some of the issues I've raised here, if you possibly could, and how this might impact on how you make your own me montage video. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed this. I'm going to sign off now, and I do hope this records okay, because there have been one or two technical issues with this morning. Bye now.